This is Chapter 32, The Building of Global Empires. The 19th century was a time of worldwide expansion among global powers in order to conquer foreign lands for political, economic, and cultural gains. This building of empires is referred to as imperialism. The term imperialism was used starting in the 1880s to describe the world domination of Europe, the United States, and Japan over colonized lands. The building of empires dates back to ancient times, but imperialism had a different type of social and economic motivation behind it. It is important to have an understanding of the attitude of the imperialists. They would often subject weaker foreign lands to their rule in quest to gain power. British explorer Cecil John Rhodes is the ideal example of an imperialist leader. While he originally explored Africa in search of a climate to alleviate his tuberculosis, he ended up monopolizing the diamond industry in Africa, and eventually he aimed to expand the British political control throughout the entire continent of Africa. A quote from him does a great job of conveying imperialist thinking during this time, and it states, "We are the finest race, and the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race." End quote. This attitude was widespread, and governments used the nationalist sentiment of their own people to their advantage. Support was gained through uniting the people in opposition of different cultures, people, and traditions. There were many motives for a country to expand its imperial empire. Imperialism imposed economic advantages for both the individual and society. The possession of outside lands allowed easy access for new raw materials like rubber, tin, copper, and petroleum. Colonization offered political gains as well. The European powers were in competition with each other to gain power and reputation. Another political motivation was the rise of communism during this time. The foreign concourses served as a distraction for the public to diffuse the social tension that was building. Also, foreign colonies offered geographical advantages through strategic port holdings. It is important to note the cultural justifications for establishments in foreign lands. Many sought to bring Christianity to places in Asia and Africa, or another common motivation was to civilize the subject lands and establish and improve social order in them. The English writer Rudyard Kipling coined the phrase, "the white man's burden," to describe this so-called European duty to enlighten other lands. Now we can ask the question, why were the Europeans so successful in their global stakeholdings? And looking into the past industrialization and technological advancements sheds some light on this subject. Improved medical technologies offered treatment and prevention of malaria in subtropical regions. This occurred through the discovery of quinine from the bark of the cinchona tree by French chemists. Transportation systems like the steamships and railroads allowed faster and safer travels, especially into the interior regions of subject colonies. The efficiency of travel was improved by the construction of canals for easy access. The Suez Canal was built between the years 1859 and 1869, and later the Panama Canal was completed in 1914. More advanced weapons offered guaranteed military success and expansion into new colonies. Also, communications were improved through the invention of the telegraph and the routing of submarine cables in the oceans. The age of European imperialism began in India with the British conquest in the second half of the 19th century. The East India Company, that was previously established in the land for trading, gave rise to this empire. At this time, the Mughal state was greatly weakened, allowing the British to establish control. The Conquest faced challenges of an Indian uprising of the sepoys. One can imagine that foreign invaders disrupted their culture and way of life. The rebellion led to several inconclusive battles, and eventually peace was gained under the control of the British in 1858. There were several results of the unsuccessful rebellion, one of them being that the British ruled through bureaucrats and officers of the East India Company, who oversaw the Indian civil servants. This system was established after the Mughal Empire was abolished and the emperor was exiled to Burma. The land of India saw rapid changes in a global economy. The colonization of India was just the beginning of European occupation in Asia. Other world powers were interested in joining the pursuit of empire. The imperialist competition for Central Asia was known as the Great Game. Russian leaders wanted to widen their territory to the south, especially since the Ottoman and Qing empires had weakened. During the Great Game, Russia and the British established alliances with rulers from Afghanistan, leaders on the borders. The competition for the land lasted until the end of the Soviet Union in 1991. Other areas of Southeast Asia were occupied by the Spanish and the Philippines, and the southeastern islands were occupied by the Dutch. In the interest of expanding trade, the British controlled Burma and founded the port of Singapore. Singapore became the busiest trade center in Southeast Asia. The French were not silent in the pursuit of global claims. Recovering from the downfall of Napoleon, they established the largest colony in Southeast Asia. Their rule aimed to spread Christianity to the indigenous people of their colony, unlike their British opponents. Overall, Southeast Asia, except for Thailand, was completely colonized by the end of the 19th century. The next area of rapid growth was in the continent of Africa. Although there was little European presence in Africa before 1875, the landmass was practically colonized by the year 1900. This was fueled by the discovery of resources like gold, ivory, and palm oil. European explorers in Africa charted the areas, and information was gathered from adventurers and missionaries. The immense system of rivers in Africa was an added bonus for imperialists. First, the Congo Free State was established by Henry Morton Stanley under the rule of King Leopold II of Belgium in 1870. The land was known for its openness to European free trade, but the harsh reality of the Congo Free State was the brutal treatment of the African natives. The rubber plantations in the Congo Free State resulted in an estimated death toll of 4 to 8 million Africans. South Africa was the next area to be colonized. Due to trading demands, Cape Town was a well-established port on the coast in preceding centuries. Europeans, known as Boers or Afrikaners, flocked to the Cape Colony. They believed that God predestined them to claim the resources and people of the Cape. The large influx of religious refugees caused the colony to surge into lands of the native Khoi and Xhosa people. Due to hostility and warfare, these native African populations were completely exterminated. Another distinguishing feature of the Afrikaner society was the slavery of the natives. The abolishment of slavery in the British state in 1833 eliminated the main labor source of the Cape Colony. Due to this, tensions rose, but Afrikaner Voortrekkers overcame the natives' resistance. Independent republics were started, like the Republic of Natal, the Orange Free State, and the South African Republic. Later, the discovery of diamonds and gold in these Afrikaner territories caused a mass migration of British miners. As a result, the South African War began between Europeans in the area. In the war, the indigenous population of the African people suffered greatly in the British concentration camps. The war ended when the Afrikaners conceded in 1902. The heavy competition for Africa led to the calling of the Berlin West Africa Conference. The conference set to organize and regulate the land claims in Africa. At the conference, 12 European countries, the United States, and the Ottoman Empire were present. It is interesting that no African people were present at the conference, although their land was the primary focus. The established ground rules determined that in order to make a claim, other powers must be notified first. Then, the claim is succeeded by an effective occupation. The guidelines for an occupation were either a military conquest or a signed agreement with an African official. The goals of the Berlin Conference were somewhat noble in their intent, though. They strived to end the slave trade, spread Christianity and civilization, and expand the colony's economy that they occupied. The next region to be colonized was the Pacific Islands, including Australia and New Zealand, which were established as settler colonies. The first set of people sent to Australia were convicted British criminals in 1788. Many migrants came to the area after it was deemed suitable to settle, especially after gold was discovered in 1851. Like many other European interactions with native populations, the indigenous people were pushed from their lands. The British considered Australia to be terra nullius, or a land belonging to no one, due to their nomadic lifestyle. The story in New Zealand is not much different than the disruption the British caused in Australia. The British came to the land with the Treaty of Watanagi in 1840. Although the original intent was to protect New Zealand, it actually brought the land into British colonial control. The New Zealand Wars were a result of this. Eventually, the native populations were ostracized into poor, isolated communities. Unlike the mainlands of Australia and New Zealand, the Pacific Islands were not originally colonized. These lands were much more peaceful and occupied by whalers, merchants, and missionaries. Imperialism was not a goal in the islands until nationalist rivalries inflated them in the late 19th century to have control of reliable coaling stations. The next players to enter the imperialist arena were the United States and Japan. The United States had just undergone Manifest Destiny and had control over much of North America. They sought free trade and to bring American resources to the market. The Monroe Doctrine served as a justification for the United States to enter into the imperialistic affairs. Expanding beyond, the United States purchased Alaska and annexed the Hawaiian Islands. The United States also laid claim to Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Haiti in the early 20th century. They eventually took control of the Philippines as well. The Japanese expansion began with the East Asian islands through a strengthened Japanese navy. They were met with conflicts in their attempt to overtake Korea in 1894, fueling the Sino-Japanese War. Japan won many unlikely victories that propelled them to be a competing notable power. There is no doubt that imperialism left lasting effects on world history. New lands were established and people were dispersed throughout the world. The global economy became stronger and more interconnected. Imperialism highlighted the differences between different races of people. White supremacy was emerging as a global problem due to the domination of European power during this time. New colonies moved to be independent of their established countries, and anti-colonial movements were on the rise. Even after the period of expansion, imperialism will have a lasting effect on global history.